A word of warning. If you're easily offended by cannibalism, death, torture, and fascinating facts about the human body, this series may not be for you. Therefore, listener discretion is advised. Cannibalism. Could you eat a whole human being? With the help of a doctor, a scientist, and a chef, I set out to see if it's possible. Cannibalism, Part 28. The Final Course. Albert Fish claimed of Grace Budd,
"It took me 9 days to eat her entire body."
but was that possible? 2018, Russia. Eduard Seleznev, later nicknamed the Arkhangelsk Cannibal, was a mid-50s ex-convict who was living homeless on the streets of Oblast. Starving and sleeping in derelict basements, he ate by killing cats, dogs and birds, slicing them up on the dirty floor, and then roasting them on a makeshift fire. With no home, no tools and no experience, it is said he ate 3 men, even though he had no teeth. So how feasible is it for a cannibal to eat a whole human being? Well, if Edward's willing volunteer was Steve, our average UK male, being hungry, it's unlikely that he'd stick to the NHS's recommended daily intake. So instead of taking 480 days to safely digest Steve's meat, as most UK eat-meaters consume 80 kilos of red meat a year, in theory, Edward could eat the lot in just 5 months, or maybe even less. As we know, the skin and the fat could last him 193 days. But as a homeless man has no fridge, or as with most cannibals, one too small to do the job. Given that it takes 1900 degrees Fahrenheit to destroy fat, as a bonfire can get as hot as 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, it may be best for his health simply to burn the unwanted remains, just as Dennis Nilsen did. As nutritional parts of the body, the brain could last him 13 days, and the marrow bone 11 and a half. But neither would hurt him if he scoffed it in one sitting. Because, as we've seen, the stomach is a digestion machine, and the waste system can expel any excess nutrients or toxins. As for the best bits of the human body, like the psoas, it's unlikely that he, or us for that matter, would know how to find it. Some cannibals are even confused by simple things like a heart and a liver, as have qualified doctors. And as it would take skill and experience to determine if a dead body has a disease, it makes perfect sense why a cannibal would choose a piece of meat as common and easily accessible as a thigh. They're psychopaths, but they're not idiots. And even a cannibal draws a line at certain meals. Convicted of a double murder in 2002, Eduard Seleznev was released in 2015. Having to scavenge for food in the bitterly cold Russian winters, his natural desire for meat consumed him, and with cats, dogs and birds being too scrawny to sustain a fully grown human, he said,
"I began to crave human flesh."
Meat is the most logical choice of food for those cannibals who aren't consumed by a sexual paraphilia or driven by a trauma stemming from a troubled past. As with animals, we eat what looks nice, but not what looks nasty. So with at least 60% of Steve being either too toxic, inedible, or only edible in small doses over at least 2 years, rather than risk his own health, it makes sense, as many cannibals do, to burn the bones, the skin and the hair, and therefore destroying the DNA and disposing the blood down the sink. It's a bit of a cop-out, but it makes sense. As chaotic as cannibals' minds are, we all share the same logic derived from the experiences of our ancestors about what foods to eat and what to avoid. Even those Paleolithic cannibals we descend from didn't eat human beings daily or by choice. As with more meat and nutrients on a horse or a buffalo, they only ate their own species as we do, due to religious beliefs, as with the Agora tribe, or during times of hardship and desperation, as in the Kazakh famine, or for the survivors of Flight AF571 in the Andes. And had our ancestors continued to eat humans, scientists believe that our bodies may have evolved to be meatier and less chewy, in the same way that we've actually bred animals to have more meat and a better taste. So did Albert Fish eat the body of Grace Budd in 9 days, as he claimed? No. But also technically yes. As in the same way that we eat a Christmas turkey, we consume the meat, the fat, the skin, the oyster, the Pope's nose and the gizzards. But we're not stupid enough to eat the feathers or anything that may hurt us. So what's thrown out is the waste. March 2016. Edward stabbed his friend, a fellow homeless man, to death in a shelter and dismembered him with an axe. With no teeth, he could only eat the fragments of flesh which his pocket knife could cut. So with the rest beginning to rot, he wrapped them in weighted refuse sacks and he threw them into the river. No cannibal has ever eaten a whole human being in the true sense of the word. It's almost impossible. And although many may claim to have feasted on flesh, too often it's to elevate their status as a serial killer, knowing that unless their stomach is autopsied immediately, all we have to go on is their word. 2 years later, Edward killed another man and then moved into his flat. Finally, with access to knives, a fridge and even an oven, he could prepare, cook and even freeze some of the meat with impunity. And having begun a job at a meat processing plant, it is said that some of the less edible body parts were disposed of there. But when his victim's family grew suspicious about their missing relative, the stranger in the flat, and the odd-looking package of meat in the fridge, they called the police, and Edward confessed. Declared sane, Edward Selesnes was sentenced to life without parole. And like most countries, as Russia has no laws against cannibalism, he was found guilty of murder and the misuse of body parts. But one question puzzled the detectives. As human meat is tough and chewy, and Edward had no teeth, how did he eat his last victim? Simple. As the flat had a blender, he liquefied the body and drank it. So you see, it is technically possible. But is a cannibal willing to go to such lengths to prove it? Thank you so much for listening to Cannibalism by Murder Mile UK True Crime. Before we end, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everyone who has bravely made it to the end of this series. Creating a 28-part series, which went out daily, was a real labour of love, but it almost broke me. So if you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends, and if you can, leave a nice review, as that would be very much appreciated. A special thank you also goes out to my unnamed sources, the doctor, the scientist and the chef, who helped me with the research. Your regular episodes of Murder Mile return at the end of August. Until then, enjoy your meal.